The clock on the microwave blinked 11:47 p.m. when David finally heard the key turn in the lock. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table for 2 hours, his coffee long cold, rehearsing the words he'd promised himself he would finally say. Elena slipped through the door quietly, her heels dangling from one hand. She froze when she saw him waiting in the dim light. "You're still up?" she said, her voice careful. "Where were you?" David's question came out softer than he'd intended, almost defeated. "I told you, drinks with the team. The client dinner ran late." She set her purse on the counter, not quite meeting his eyes. It was the same answer she'd given last Tuesday. And the Thursday before that, David had memorized the pattern of her late nights over the past 3 months. How she'd started wearing different perfume. How her laughter on phone calls had a lightness he hadn't heard in years. How she'd become a stranger sleeping beside him. "Elena!" He stood up, his chair scraping against the tile. "I need you to tell me the truth." Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, but something heavier. Resignation, maybe. "What truth do you want, David? I want to know if there's someone else." His hands trembled slightly. "I want you to look at me and tell me there's no one else." Elena's eyes finally met his, and in them he saw something that terrified him more than confirmation of an affair. He saw pity. "There's no other man, David." The relief that should have flooded through him didn't come, because the way she said it, the careful parsing of words, told him everything. "Him or me, Elena?" The question ripped out of him, 3 years of silence breaking apart. "I need you to choose. Him or me." She dropped her heels. They clattered against the hardwood, too loud in the quiet house. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "David, there is no him." Her voice cracked. "There's no affair. There's no other person." "Then where are you?" He moved closer, close enough to smell the wine on her breath, the cigarette smoke she'd never admit to. "Because you're not here. You haven't been here for months." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. "I've been trying to find her." "Her." "Me." The word came out as a whisper. "The me I used to be. Before we got married. Before I became just your wife. David's wife. The woman who makes dinner and remembers birthdays and smiles at your work functions and never asks for anything because she's supposed to be grateful for the life you've given her." David felt something crack open in his chest. "I never asked you to be that. You didn't have to ask." Elena's laugh was bitter. "I volunteered. I erased myself so completely that some days I can't remember what I wanted before I wanted only to make you happy." She moved toward him then, close enough that he could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes, the way her mascara had smudged. "Those late nights? I've been taking painting classes. Remember how I used to paint? I've been going to poetry readings at that bookstore on 7th. I've been sitting in coffee shops alone, reading books I choose, thinking thoughts that have nothing to do with grocery lists or whether your mother's birthday gift was thoughtful enough." David reached for her hand. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I was afraid," she whispered, "that you'd married the version of me that disappeared." They lay in bed that night, not touching, the space between them feeling like an ocean. David stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their marriage, looking for the point where Elena had started vanishing. "Do you remember the first time we made love?" Elena's voice cut through the darkness. He turned toward her. "Of course I do. Tell me." "It was in your studio apartment. You had paint under your fingernails. There was a half-finished canvas of a thunderstorm on the easel, and you'd been working on it for 3 days straight, barely sleeping." He smiled at the memory. "You smelled like turpentine and coffee." Elena shifted closer, her hand finding his in the dark. "I was so alive then, so completely myself. Do you remember what you said to me that night?" "I said I'd never met anyone who burned as bright as you. And I believed you meant you'd never try to dim me. Her thumb traced circles on his palm. But somewhere along the way, I started dimming myself. Not because you asked me to, but because I thought that's what love meant, making yourself smaller, so there's more room for the other person. David rolled onto his side, facing her fully now. In the moonlight streaming through the window, he could see the vulnerability in her expression, the same look she'd had that first night, when she pulled him close and whispered, "I want you to see all of me." "Show me," he said now, his voice rough. "Show me who you're trying to find again." Elena's breath caught. She kissed him then, but it wasn't the careful, choreographed intimacy they'd fallen into over the years. This was hungry, desperate, a woman claiming space in her own life, in her own body. Her hands moved over him, with new urgency, as if she were remembering what desire felt like when it came from her own need, not from duty or routine. David responded in kind, pulling her closer, wanting to prove he could love every version of her. The one who'd made him breakfast every Sunday, yes, but also this one, the one who tasted of wine and secrets and long nights spent chasing pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever. They made love slowly, with the kind of attention that comes from almost losing something precious. David traced the curve of her hip, the hollow of her throat, trying to memorize her again, or perhaps for the first time, really seeing her. Afterward, Elena cried quietly against his chest. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "But I can't lose myself again, either. I don't know how to have both." David held her tighter, feeling the weight of his own failure. He'd built a marriage like a comfortable prison, never meaning to, never noticing. He'd loved the peace and stability, never asking what it had cost her to create it. "Tell me about the paintings," he said finally. Elena lifted her head. "What?" "The ones you've been working on. Tell me about them." So she did. In the dark, with his arms around her, Elena talked about colors and light, and the way anger looked when you tried to paint it, how grief had texture, how she'd spent 3 weeks trying to capture the exact shade of loneliness on canvas. She talked until her voice grew hoarse, until the first light of dawn crept through their window, until David understood just how much silence she'd been carrying, how many words she'd swallowed to keep the peace. When she finally fell asleep, David lay awake, wondering if love could be rebuilt, or if some bridges, once burned, couldn't be crossed again. The next morning, David called in sick to work, something he never did. Elena found him in the garage at 9 a.m., pulling boxes from the back corner. "What are you doing?" She stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. "Looking for your easel. The one from your apartment." He moved another box, dust motes dancing in the morning light. "I helped you move it here 8 years ago. I know it's back here somewhere." "David, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He turned to face her. "I want to." It took another hour, but they found it, collapsed and forgotten behind holiday decorations and old tax returns. The wood was still good, the joints solid. David carried it into the spare bedroom they'd been using for storage, the room that had somehow become a graveyard for Elena's old life. "I thought," he said, slightly out of breath, "that maybe we could turn this into a studio. For you." Elena set down her coffee, looking around the cluttered space. "This is your office." "I don't need an office. I have one at work." He started moving boxes toward the door. "But you need a place that's yours. A place where you can be loud and messy and completely yourself without worrying about whether paint will stain the carpet or whether you're taking up too much space." She helped him clear the room, and for the first time in months, they worked in comfortable synchronicity. They talked while they worked, really talked. David asked about the poetry readings, and Elena told him about the nervousness of walking into that bookstore alone the first time, how terrified she'd been that someone would ask why she was there, what she was running from. "I wasn't running from you," she said, pausing with a box of old textbooks. I need you to understand that. I know. David set down his own box. You were running toward yourself. There's a difference. By lunch, the room was empty except for the easel standing in the center, like a promise. They ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor, their backs against the wall. I want to meet her, David said suddenly. Who? The Elena who goes to poetry readings and paints storms. I want to know her. I think I married her once, and then got so comfortable that I stopped paying attention when she changed. Elena's eyes welled up. What if you don't like who I'm becoming? What if I love her even more? He took her hand. Elena, I fell in love with someone who burned bright, remember? I'm the one who should be asking if you can forgive me for getting so comfortable with the dimmed version that I never noticed you were suffocating. She kissed him, then tasting of pizza and tears and hope. It led to more, fumbling out of clothes in the empty room, making love on the bare hardwood floor, like they were 25 again, like they had nothing but each other, and that was enough. Elena moved above him with a freedom he'd forgotten she possessed, her head thrown back, completely present in her own pleasure, her own body, her own moment. Later, tangled together, David said, tomorrow I want you to take me to one of those poetry readings. Really? Really? And I want to see your paintings. All of them. Elena smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Okay. But they both knew it wouldn't be that simple. The hard work was just beginning. The poetry reading was in a basement bookstore that smelled of old paper and coffee. David felt out of place immediately. Everyone seemed younger, more artistic, wearing the kind of casual confidence he'd lost somewhere between his first mortgage and his third promotion. Elena transformed the moment they walked in. People called her Ellie, a name David hadn't heard her use in years. She introduced him simply as David, not as her husband, and he understood this was her space, her separate world, and he was a guest in it. A young woman with purple hair read a poem about her mother's hands. An older man performed something about the last conversation with his brother. Then the host called Ellie, and David watched his wife walk to the front of the room with a notebook he'd never seen before. This is called The Woman Who Stayed Too Long at the Party, Elena began. Her poem was about a woman who forgot how to leave, who smiled until her face ached, who agreed until she couldn't remember what she actually thought, who woke up one day and didn't recognize herself in the mirror. It was painful and beautiful and completely honest, and David felt every word like a blow to his chest. When she finished, the room erupted in snaps and applause. Elena's eyes found his, seeking something, approval, understanding, maybe just acknowledgement. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. Afterward, her friends wanted to go to a bar. David started to make excuses, but Elena grabbed his hand. Come, she said, please. At the bar, he learned about her painting teacher, Gabriel, an older man who apparently had shown in galleries across Europe. He learned about Nina, the poet with the purple hair, who worked 3 jobs and still found time to write every day. He learned that Elena had submitted her poetry to a journal and was waiting to hear back, something she'd never mentioned to him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked later in the Uber home. Because I was afraid it wouldn't be real if I said it out loud. She leaned her head on his shoulder, like, if I named it, you'd see how selfish I was being, taking time for myself, spending money on classes, wanting things that had nothing to do with our life together. It's not selfish to want things. Isn't it, though? Elena looked up at him. We've been trying to have a baby for 2 years, David. 2 years of appointments and tests and disappointment. And instead of focusing on that, instead of being the wife who's devastated every month when it doesn't happen, I've been sneaking off to paint and write poetry. What kind of woman does that make me? David felt something click into place. Is that what this is about? You think wanting to paint means you don't want a family, doesn't it? Elena, he cupped her face in his hands. You're allowed to want more than one thing. You're allowed to be complicated. She kissed him in the back seat of the Uber, the driver politely pretending not to notice. When they got home, they didn't make it past the living room, desperate for each other in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. David worshipped her body with a new understanding. This wasn't just his wife, but a whole person with dreams and fears, and a creative fire he'd almost helped extinguish. I love you, he said against her skin. Every version of you, even the ones I haven't met yet. Promise, she whispered. I promise. But promises, they would both learn, are easier to make than to keep. 3 months later, Elena got the call. Her poetry had been accepted by a prestigious journal, and Gabriel wanted to feature her paintings in a group show at his gallery. David found her in her studio. Their spare room had become hers entirely now, paint-splattered and chaotic and alive. She was staring at a canvas of what looked like a woman emerging from water, or maybe diving into it. He could never tell which, and she said that was the point. They want 20 pieces by June, she said without turning around. Gabriel thinks I could sell most of them. He has collectors asking about my work. Elena, that's incredible. David moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him. It means I need to paint full-time. I need to quit my job. There it was. The choice neither of them had wanted to name. Okay, David said simply. We can't afford it. Elena turned in his arms. Not if we're still trying to have a baby. Not with the fertility treatments. Then we paused the treatments. David, I mean it. He kissed her forehead. This is your moment. We can try again for a baby later. We have time. Elena's laugh was half-sob. Do we? I'm 37. In fertility years, I'm ancient. But you're on fire right now. David pulled back to look at her. Elena, I've watched you come back to life these past few months. I'm not going to be the person who asks you to put that fire out for the possibility of something else. What if I regret it? Her voice broke. What if I choose painting and poetry and this whole artistic dream, and then it's too late for children, and I hate myself for being so selfish? What if you don't choose it, and you hate yourself anyway? Hate me for making you choose. Hate the baby for being the reason you gave up the life you just found. They stood in silence, the weight of possible futures pressing down on both of them. I don't know how to do this, Elena whispered, finally. I don't know how to be both. The artist and the wife, and maybe someday, the mother. I don't know how to be whole without splitting into pieces. Maybe you don't have to figure it all out right now. David took her hands. Maybe we just take the next right step. You quit your job. You paint for the show. We see what happens. And the baby will happen if it's meant to happen, or it won't, and we'll build a different kind of life. But Elena, I don't want children with a version of you that's slowly dying inside. I want them with you, all of you, fire and paint and poetry and late nights, and the woman who's brave enough to choose herself. Elena kissed him then, and it tasted like salt and hope and fear and possibility. They made love in her studio, surrounded by her art, paint still wet on some canvases. And David understood finally that this was what it meant to truly see someone, not just the version that was convenient or comfortable, but the whole messy, complicated, beautiful truth of them. Him or me? Elena murmured against his chest afterward, echoing his question from months ago. Always you? David said. Every version of you. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors Elena would spend the next morning trying to capture on canvas. And for the first time in years, both of them felt like they were finally standing on solid ground, not because they had all the answers, but because they were brave enough to live the questions together. The end.